Well, that's a tough act to follow, isn't it?
Yeah, I know we have a saying, it has to do with ski jumping, and the greatest ski jumper of all time was Bjørn Wirkola. And then we say that this is like jumping after Wirkola. You know?
Well, we only had Eddie the Eagle, so I don't have anything to live up to.
Right. So, Anne, you and Mastercard, you've been personally championing financial inclusion for some time now. So why did this become an area of such focus and interest for you and Mastercard?
Well, you know, if you think about the business that we're in the flow business and we're in the transaction business. So it actually makes a lot of sense for our business from a sustainable point of view to connect more people in the world and to actually digitize the flows. So it's absolutely a business-driven model. The other side of it, and I'm mentioning this because James has just been on stage, is when we IPO'd in 2006, we actually took 10% of our stock and we put it into a foundation. You mentioned the foundation to me before, Paul. And by doing that, at that time, we were worth about $5 billion. Today, we're worth market cap about $230 billion. And the thing is, that foundation has grown at the same time as the business has been really successful. So now it's an over $20 billion foundation, one of the biggest in the world. And that foundation is investing in education and those socio-economic activities. And so you've got the business accelerating and you've got the foundation coming in, providing the level of education needed to actually make a successful world. Because what's the point of doing business in a failing world? I mean, that's bad for business. So it's actually a very business-driven approach.
Right, right. Yeah, so Mastercard is a very central player here, and you are, heading Mastercard UK and following this very closely. So, with your kind of insight into this area and following financial inclusion, what's your view on the progress in financial inclusion?
Well, I think as we heard from His Royal Highness this morning, there's been actually pretty great progress since 2011 because so many more people have been included in the financial system. And we've also heard this from James from Equity Bank. But I think what's happened in many parts of the world, people have been focusing on how many people did we connect? Have we connected the next billion people to the financial system? And I think the question now has to move from that to actually, what is the usage? Because what's the point in being connected if people are really not using these services? And we, recently did a piece of research that is telling us that, for example, 1 in 5 bank accounts in the world are actually dormant. And I think that means great progress connecting people, but let's really focus on making it a very useful activity. And I think we heard from the Secretary this morning that we need human-centric approach. What are we designing? What problem are we trying to solve? Because if we don't build something that's useful for people, there's absolutely no point.
Exactly. When you look at the various areas where you could influence, I mean, the private sector could influence users to who have got access but needs to do more to get them to actually use this, make it more convenient. What kind of areas do you see that the financial FinTech, for instance, and other private sector players could do?
Well, first of all, I love James's comment that he's competing with the mattresses, by the way. We've been having this mantra that we're a world beyond cash. Maybe we're a world beyond mattresses. But I think the thing here is to think, what problem are we trying to solve, and how can FinTech help you solve that? And one of the ways that I think you can design something good is by saying, how does it link to other things that are happening to a person in the country? And so an example I would give you is we've been working with a company called M-Copa in Africa, who've been producing solar panels for people. And these are like A3-sized solar panels that can be used in an individual household. And they deliver a battery pack, and they deliver a light bulb and the solar panel. And of course, through this solar panel, you can charge your telephone. Well, the thing is, most Africans can't afford to buy a solar panel just from the get-go. So they need to be able to pay in installments, a pay-as-you-go model. And so we combined with them to put a QR code-based model on the battery pack, and for them to be able to use their telephone to make the payment. And you can see that you're then providing them something useful that would want them to make a digital payment. And of course, it's so much more easy to administer than cash. The second thing, though, is how did that money get into the mobile phone in the first place so that people could actually make a payment? And I think you have to then think about what is the funding source for people? Because if I've just got $5 a day, why would I put those $5 into a telephone? I'm not really incented to do that. But if, say, my government is paying me a farming subsidy, child benefit, a pension payment, whatever it is, and they digitize that flow and they put it automatically into my telephone, then at least I've got the money there in the first place that I can then use to pay for my solar panel. So you have to think about how the flows work and what problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, because in many countries, governments are, major purchasers or major providers of some kind of service. So, in this sense, they could contribute to build a market, in a sense, by creating enough demand or enough transactions. So, this was one area. Do you see other areas where one needs to work with government in order to build something that will be workable for the user? That there are many different pieces in the puzzle, that not only one actor alone can do it. Do you have any other examples of your own experience?
There's tons of examples around the world about this, because, as you say, it's not just the government. It can be things like the NGOs. We've been working with the World Food Programme. It was mentioned earlier about their work in Jordan. We've been working with them across the Middle East. And when you think about things like the World Food Programme, what are they trying to do? They're trying to give people the ability and the dignity to buy their own money. It's a long time since they were dropping rice out of helicopters in countries like the Lebanon that are very rich in farming. In order to do that, you need to identify who those people are, so technology plays a role in that. But also, if you think about the data that's generated, data philanthropy, by the way, is one of the big topics of the future, I think, and it's well overdue. But, for example, the World Food Programme told us the data that we generated about what refugees are buying for themselves when you give them buying power by loading their money into a telephone or onto a card, they found they were buying a lot of powdered milk. Well, that's probably not a big surprise to those of us who understand about refugees, but the thing is, a lot of children. And the World Food Programme took that data and said, instead of one person buying powdered milk, there's 1 million people here buying powdered milk, and how about giving us a discount? This is a great example of how you work with an NGO, you're using technology, you get the data, you use the data to actually drive down the price. And you have to work with local technology providers as well as global companies such as ourselves to create the connectivity that works on the ground. So there's a lot of people involved in the ecosystem, and the public-private partnerships are really important in driving this.
Right. Yeah, we had a little chat yesterday, and you mentioned one thing. There was another type of partnership between, like, I think it was Unilever and Mastercard and was it KCB or something?
Yeah.
Jasaduka?
Yeah, Jasaduka, yeah.
You can maybe elaborate a bit on
Yeah,
that.
well, we'd been starting to think about those, those small shops that they have in Africa. They're called dukas. Many of them, by the way, are run by women. And women are, there's a gender gap in the financial inclusion world as there is in the rest of the world, sadly. But we started to think about the fact that actually these shopkeepers are having to run out of their goods before they can order the new goods because, they're cash-based. And especially if they're women, one of the biggest problems they have is they can't get collateral. And if they can't get collateral, then they don't have collateral, sorry. And it's hard for them to get bank loans and credit, and I think we heard that in the last presentation. So we said, well, just a minute though, these shopkeepers are buying from big supply company Unilever. And so what if we could automate from the buyers, from the consumers buying from the shopkeeper through to the shopkeeper buying from Unilever, and we can start to see the whole flow of the goods and actually present data to the bank to say, this is a good business, the shopkeeper's turning over a lot of products. Please lend them some money so that they can buy more soap powder before their shelves become empty, and do it on the basis of, this is back to data, empirical data. We actually rolled this out across thousands of dukas in Africa, and what we found was when we put that model in place, we saw a 20% uplift in sales within the first few months. It was really impactful. And the thing is, it's just great because Unilever and ourselves have been saying, but this supply chain, this doesn't just work in Africa, it works in India, it works all over the world. Actually, it may not just be needed in developing markets, it works in developed markets. And it's not just Unilever, it's everything else that works in this kind of supply chain way. So we see this as a really interesting and exciting model to actually connect people, get them credit, get them actually to learn how to manage their businesses in a more efficient way. So it's got all of those education components as well. Very exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like this type of case, this kind of model, we needed 3 different big players to get the banks to kind of take the step and say, yes, we trust that the kind of digital track record is enough evidence of creditworthiness. That also takes, to some extent, a little mental leap on behalf of the credit assessors in the banks. So I guess it's not like every bank immediately jumps on this, right? But you found some kind of benign bank who saw that potential and was willing to go for it. Do you see a scope for official development assistance, so ODA, in this area? I can give you an example. I mean, for training the bank staff. I'll give an example. Norway supported a scheme in the Middle East, right, where we help train bank staff to assess creditworthiness of small and medium-sized businesses, SMEs. And then there were other elements like grants for loans and risk sharing for the bank. But the point was that when the bank was getting a lower risk for giving a loan, they were willing to do it because we paid part of the bill. But then we also helped the bank staff learning how to assess the credit risk. And this was very successful because just after one round of an SME, like typically most of them were female entrepreneurs running their own small shops, who had been excluded from the financial sector for many loans earlier. But once they got the first loan and they repaid, then it wasn't necessary for the bank staff anymore to use our guarantee.
Right.
Then the female entrepreneur had become a regular customer.
Yeah.
So combining the training that we paid for as a grant and the other incentive mechanism, that helped. So I was wondering if you see a need for that kind of collaboration that could be useful in your area.
I think that's fantastic. I mean, I think there's absolutely a need for that. And I love the idea that you seed it, and then it's just successful and you can move away because it gives you the ability to seed more things. And you know, your example about it actually being female entrepreneurs, as I said, you know, there's a lot of data that shows women have quite a tough time getting credit from banks in all parts of the world, or even getting investment in their companies if they, you know, they're a female entrepreneur. But there's also data that shows women are actually pretty good at paying back. They have lower default rates where it's been successful. And we all know that the world's economy is really, really dependent on these SMEs being, you know, a thriving community. So absolutely, I think that's a tremendous model. We should definitely replicate it.
Yeah.
He's just told me about it now.
It just came now. Right. With your experience working in this field for Mastercard, you've seen a lot of different programs and so on. And what are the biggest lessons that you have learned from this, and you know, you would like to highlight?
Well, I think, first of all, as I said, it's about usefulness, but it's very much about building the ecosystem. If there's nothing there in the ecosystem, then what's the point of connecting people? And the first experience that I'd had of it was actually in South Africa, where we'd worked with the government there to actually start giving people their benefits payments electronically. And they'd had a lot of identity theft where people had been claiming benefits in one township and had gone to another and said they were someone else. And so the first thing that we did was move to biometric cards. So you had your fingerprint and your voice recognized, and then you couldn't fool the system about who you were. But then, in order to make those useful, other things had to happen. I actually flew down to Soweto to see whether I could buy something in the shops, you know, with one of these biometric cards. And actually what happened was that a local company called Blue Label, who had done telephone top-up in the townships, had started to do card acceptance because they were the ones who had the relationship with the shopkeepers there. And the transit systems that took people, you know, to work in Johannesburg started to accept cards, you know, whether they were, you know, the small shared vehicles that people used or whether it was actually the rapid transit systems. And if you think about it, all of these players had to start adopting the infrastructure in order to make it work. But one of the things that I found was, you know, I thought, oh, there's going to have to be a lot of education about to the people in the street about you can buy this way. But actually, when I showed up in Soweto a few weeks after we launched the program, there was some woman standing in front of me in the queue. Her name was Tilly, actually, and she took her purse out from her dress and produced one of these SASA cards and bought something in the shop. And I went, wow. You know, I said to her, is it okay? Can I have my photograph taken with you? And she shook her head and put the card back into her, and wallet back into her dress and said, no, that's money. And I thought, if you do something really useful, then, you know, then it you know, people adopt it. But you have to create the environment that they can adopt it in. And so it's building that ecosystem that's the important thing. And then people know that it's money. So.
Right. So that's very much the challenge, right? It's like one actor can't do it alone. It's finding ways of, you know, finding out which different types of pieces of the puzzle you need to put together with which actors and who does what.
Yeah.
Do you have any other examples of such kind of like win-win scenarios, like the different players who contribute to the solution, they all see that they can get a benefit from it, so they...
Well, yes, absolutely. They say they can get a benefit from it because most governments lose a lot of money by dealing in cash. I mean, just to count it and move it around and so on costs between 0.5% and 1.5% of anybody's GDP. And that's without layering, fraud, tax evasion, which takes it up to several percentages. So that becomes interesting. The transit systems operators save a lot of money by not dealing in cash. And we actually have transit projects going on in about 150 countries around the world. So that's good. Most people have a telephone today, even if they don't have a bank account. I think the research we did said over 600 million people are out there with a telephone that don't have access to the formal financial system. So there is big opportunity to provide them with products. But I absolutely agree with James. It's not just payments you're trying to solve for. People need everything. They need, the whole package. And so therefore working with partners is the way to do that. For us as a network, we don't ever deal directly with the consumer. We work with the world's banks to deliver things. We work with the governments. We work with the NGOs. Our model was predicated on being a network that grew through partnerships. And we see that absolutely as the way forward. So our job is to provide the latest technology and join with people like you, Paul, to educate people how to use things and how to build credit markets around it and so on. And I think that's the way to solve most of the problems that we're facing. But it's not, I think His Royal Highness said at the beginning, it's not easy. And we all need to be working together to do it.
Right. Thanks. Yeah, we are about to wrap up. Just very last little question for you, Anne, because we talked a lot about Mastercard's work in developing countries, but you're also a major player in richer parts of the world. So let's say Europe, what has Mastercard done there on FinTech?
On FinTech, oh, well, first of all, with FinTechs around the world, we actually, first of all, we are a FinTech, by the way. But we're very interested in working with FinTechs everywhere in the world. And we've actually engaged with over 10,000 FinTechs through our Start Path program. And here in Europe, we join, we work with people like Lighthouse here. Because we can't invent most things ourselves. What we want to do is find FinTechs who want to piggyback on this massive global network, real-time global network that we built, and build lots of features and functions together with us to actually be able to reach everyone. And every year we work with several thousand FinTechs to actually launch new products and services, and we help FinTechs incubate. So names that you would know that we've helped to incubate are Revolut, for example, Shopify. We work with companies that are distributing their products by all sorts of different means. Many of the challenger banks are working with us, but it's not just in the banking arena. Netflix, Apple, you name it. So because these companies help us build the global ecosystems that make our business thrive and make their businesses thrive. So it's a very exciting time to be in FinTech, by the way, and a very exciting time to be a big global network.
Indeed, it is exciting. This has been very interesting for me, and I hope for all in the audience too. I've learned a lot, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.